A millionaire groom invites his ex to his wedding, just to watch her break. But when she walks in with 3 boys who look exactly like him, the truth shatters everything. Secrets unravel, loyalties are tested, and one man must decide between the life he built and the family he never knew he had. Where are you watching from? Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss stories that move your heart and shake your soul. The city skyline stretched out like a silver crown beneath the early morning haze, a cold beauty Nathan Carter had come to dominate. From the top floor of his headquarters, the world seemed so small, so far beneath him. He stood alone, silhouetted by floor-to-ceiling glass, watching as fog crept through the streets like a secret. His reflection stared back at him, clean-cut, tailored, unshakable. But the man inside was trembling, and no one knew why. Today should have been triumphant. The final fittings had been done, the guest list scrubbed of any surprises, and his fiancée Julia was likely sipping champagne while finalizing press photos with her PR team. She was elegant, a textbook choice, poised, intelligent, and utterly uninvolved in his past. That was what he'd wanted, what Veronica had pushed for. No distractions, no vulnerability, no Emily. But here he was, 6 years later, still haunted by the ghost of a woman whose name he hadn't said aloud in years. Emily Ross. He reached for the invitation resting on his mahogany desk. Heavy cardstock, embossed lettering, a $20,000 design job Veronica had called branding excellence. But all he saw was a lie. He flipped the envelope over in his hand, ran his thumb along the sealed edge, then slid it into the inner pocket of his jacket. He wasn't planning to send it. Not really. But something inside him refused to throw it away. The driver met him downstairs without question, as always. Nathan didn't offer a destination until they were already crawling through downtown traffic. St. Andrew's Pediatric Center, he said flatly. The words tasted foreign in his mouth. The clinic's entrance looked like a mural exploded. Cartoon animals danced across the glass, and painted sunbeams curled around the corners of the doors. It smelled like disinfectant and crayon wax, warm and sterile all at once. Nothing like his world. He paused just inside, unsure, something that hadn't happened in years. A nurse behind the reception desk glanced up and offered a curious smile. "Can I help you, sir?" "I'm looking for Dr. Emily Ross." The woman's hands paused over her keyboard. "And you are?" He hesitated, then said, "An old friend." She typed something slowly, one eyebrow raised. "She's finishing up with a patient. You can wait over there." The chairs were plastic and too small for his broad shoulders. Children ran through the halls, laughter ricocheting off tile. A little boy darted past him, curly brown hair bouncing, eyes wide with mischief. He was laughing, his joy untamed. Something about his face hit Nathan like a punch. Those eyes. God, those eyes. Then a woman's voice called out, soft but firm, "Ben, slow down." The boy squealed and vanished around the corner. Nathan's heart stuttered. He knew that voice. Even softened by time, it was unmistakable. He stood quickly when the nurse called his name. "Dr. Ross is in room 212. The hallway stretched forever. His polished shoes squeaked against the floor. He was suddenly aware of everything. The faint scent of lemon cleaner, the quiet beeping from inside exam rooms, the sound of children giggling. When he reached room 212, the door opened before he could knock. Emily stood there in navy scrubs beneath a white coat, a stethoscope draped around her neck. Her hair was shorter than he remembered, tucked behind one ear. Her features were more defined, her presence steadier than ever. Beautiful still. Maybe more so. "Nathan," she said calmly, though her eyes betrayed surprise. "I was told someone important was waiting." He tried to smile, but it faltered. "I should have guessed you'd still be impossible to catch off guard." "It's been a long time. 6 years, 3 months, 2 weeks, he said. She blinked once. "You always were precise." The silence between them settled like dust. He cleared his throat. "I didn't come to cause trouble." "I doubt you came for a checkup either." "No," he admitted. "I came to invite you, to my wedding." She didn't flinch, but something shifted, a sharp flicker behind her eyes. "You came here, to my work, to invite me to your wedding?" He nodded. "Why?" Nathan took a breath, the kind that hurts more going in than coming out. "Because you mattered. You still do. I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know." She crossed her arms, the corners of her mouth pulled tight. "You disappeared, Nathan. Just vanished. And now you want me to applaud your next act? No, he said quietly. I didn't know how to leave you out of it. Emily tilted her head slightly. Are you asking me to celebrate what you built, or are you trying to show me what I lost? He looked at her then. Really looked, and he didn't answer, because he wasn't sure he knew. She sighed, stepping aside as a nurse wheeled a cart past them. I have patience. If there's more to say? He shook his head. No, that's it. I'll send the invitation anyway. You already did, she said, her voice cool but not cruel. Nathan blinked. She didn't explain, just nodded once and turned, disappearing down the hall. He didn't follow. Instead, he walked back through the mural-lined hallway, through the laughter and colored walls, and stepped out into the crisp daylight like a man walking out of a dream. He hadn't expected her to cry. He hadn't expected her to yell, but he hadn't expected her calm either. And he hadn't expected that boy with his eyes. Back in his penthouse, Nathan poured a drink he didn't sip. He sat in silence, the unopened invitation still heavy in his pocket. Emily's face stayed with him. So did the kid. He didn't know what he wanted from her. But now, for the first time in 6 years, he wasn't sure he was the one in control anymore. Emily stood at the window of her modest 2-bedroom apartment, watching the afternoon light spill over the sidewalk below in long golden ribbons. The city moved with its usual rhythm, horns blaring, children laughing, buses hissing to a stop. But inside her kitchen, time had frozen. On the counter sat an unopened envelope. Heavy paper, the kind you don't just send for bills or birthday cards. His name? Nathan Carter, stamped in elegant gold. She hadn't touched it since it arrived, hand-delivered through the hospital mail chute 2 days earlier. She didn't need to open it to know what it was. She'd felt it coming for months. A shift in the air, a ripple of curiosity from old mutual friends, the sudden mention of his name in online articles she'd tried to ignore. And then he appeared in person, as if summoned by some cruel twist of timing. The knock at the front door pulled her out of the memory like a snapped rubber band. Dottie Green, her 70-something neighbor and honorary grandma, bustled in without waiting for a greeting, holding a glass dish covered in foil and a scowl that could stop traffic. You still haven't opened it, have you? Dottie asked, her sharp eyes darting to the envelope. Emily didn't answer. She just leaned her hip against the table and crossed her arms. You're not curious? I'm exhausted, Emily said, voice low. Dottie gave a long, dramatic sigh, setting the dish down and peeling back the foil to reveal baked macaroni with breadcrumbs. You know, when I was your age, we didn't wait around for men to come clean. We marched up to them and demanded the truth. Emily smiled faintly. You also had landlines and cassette tapes. And no one hiding triplets from a billionaire, Dottie muttered, loud enough to hear. Emily stiffened. It wasn't like that. I know it wasn't. You tried to tell him, I remember. You cried on my porch that night, remember? You were holding those 3 ultrasound pictures like they were glass. Dottie's tone softened, her bluster evaporating. You mailed that letter. I mailed 3, Emily whispered, and he never replied. Emily nodded, biting the inside of her cheek. I thought he didn't care. He never got them, Dottie said flatly. I'm sure of it. How can you be sure? Dottie pulled a folded paper from her purse. An old printout, yellowed edges, faint ink. I dug this up yesterday, from when you asked me to proof your letter before you sent it. Emily took it gingerly. The words hit her like a song she hadn't heard in years. Nathan, I heard 3 heartbeats today. Not mine. Not yours. 3. Her throat closed, her hands trembled slightly. I sent that letter on a Monday, Emily said, more to herself than to Dottie. 3 days later, I got a call from his assistant, Veronica. Dottie's expression darkened. The Ice Queen. She said Nathan was too busy for personal distractions, that if I needed financial help, I could contact legal. You didn't tell me that, Dottie said, voice low with anger. I was embarrassed, Emily admitted, and pregnant, and terrified. She walked slowly to the kitchen drawer and pulled out a weathered folder. Inside were 3 birth certificates, each marked father unknown. She laid them on the table like a silent indictment. I couldn't force him to be a father, she said. And I sure wasn't going to beg for a place in his life when he clearly didn't want us. Dottie touched her arm. Honey, he didn't even know there was an us. You were silenced. Emily didn't respond. Her eyes were locked on a photograph tucked in the folder's corner. The boys, Eli, Max, and Ben, grinning wildly, mid-jump on the playground. She traced their outlines with her finger. "He's marrying someone else," Emily said finally. "Let him," Dottie replied. "But don't let him marry her without knowing the truth." Emily looked up sharply. "You think I should go?" "I think you should show him what he missed," Dottie said, her eyes flashing with the kind of fire that made Emily feel 16 again. "Not for revenge, for clarity, for closure, for your boys." That night, after the dishes were washed and the boys were asleep, Ben clutching his dinosaur, Max half covered in Lego bricks, and Eli already dreaming with a book spread open on his chest, Emily sat at her small desk with the invitation in her lap. She finally opened it. Heavy cream cardstock, perfectly typeset. "Nathan Carter and Julia Blackwell request the honor of your presence." Her fingers hovered over the RSVP line. She didn't cry. Instead, she opened her laptop, pulled up a blank document, and began writing 3 names in large, bold letters. Eli, Max, Ben. She didn't plan to tell Nathan through a letter this time. She'd bring them with her. She'd walk into that wedding, not for spectacle, but so her boys would know their story didn't begin in silence. And maybe, just maybe, so they could end the silence once and for all. Down the hall she heard a faint sound, Ben tapping out a tune on the tiny keyboard he loved. Twinkle, twinkle, off-key, hesitant but earnest. The same song she'd played once long ago, for a man who never heard it again. But this time, the song wasn't a memory. It was a signal. It was time to stop hiding. Nathan Carter sat in the cavernous stillness of the Ellis Global boardroom, the skyline stretching beyond the glass like a kingdom he'd conquered but never quite touched. Sunlight spilled across the polished table, refracting off brushed steel and dark wood with surgical precision. Everything here gleamed, controlled, calculated, pristine. Just like the life he had built, just like he had always wanted. But today, something was off. The chair beneath him groaned faintly as he shifted. On the table in front of him lay the wedding seating chart, a glossy printout annotated in Veronica's perfect handwriting. 3rd row, left side, aisle seat. Dr. Emily Ross. He stared at the name for too long. His thumb tapped the page like a metronome counting down a beat he didn't yet understand. Veronica Hale entered the room as if summoned by thought alone. Every step crisp, every breath timed. She wore her usual charcoal gray suit, her hair pulled into a severe knot that announced order, power, and zero tolerance for surprises. "I've confirmed the minister, the florist, and the press embargo," she said, setting a tablet down beside him. "Final RSVP counts are in. Only one pending." Nathan didn't look up. "Emily." Veronica's mouth twitched slightly. "Yes, though I doubt she'll come. She said she might." His voice was quiet, but the weight of it pressed into the air. Veronica paused, studying him. "Would you like her moved to a less prominent position? I can shift her to the back, maybe near the catering staff. Less press risk." Nathan's jaw flexed. "No. Leave her where she is." "Very well," she said, but there was a note of hesitation in her voice, the tiniest hitch, like a step on uncertain ground. He didn't miss it. He stood, walking toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city hummed below, but it felt as distant as a dream. His reflection stared back at him, flawless, hollow. "She had a kid with her," he said, voice low. "At the hospital." Veronica's eyes narrowed. "A patient?" Nathan turned to face her fully. "No, a boy. 6, maybe. He had my eyes." Veronica didn't blink. "Unlikely. I didn't say it was mine," he lied, but something inside him twisted violently. That boy, the curls, the grin, the way he darted past with a kind of defiance Nathan remembered in himself. The kind that said, "I don't need permission to exist." Later that night, Nathan couldn't sleep. The penthouse was dark save for the glow of his laptop. He pulled up the name Emily Ross and typed it into the press database. Not much, a few local medical articles, pediatric awards, a photo, Emily standing beneath a hospital banner smiling, radiant, and beside her, 3 boys. Not 1, 3, all about 6 years old. All with dark hair and wide, knowing eyes. One had his dimple, another, his exact jawline. The last, a tilt of the head Nathan had seen in every mirror since childhood. His breath caught, he zoomed in, hands trembling, he reached for his phone. "Eli," he said when the line picked up. "I need you to run something, quietly, a background trace. The woman's name is Dr. Emily Ross. I want you to find everything, and Eli, I need you to be fast." By morning, the results were in. A secure file sat in his inbox marked confidential, paternity potential. The subject line was simple. You might want to sit down. He opened the file with a tension that gripped his chest like a vice. 3 birth certificates, no father listed, photos, facial scans, AI-assisted genetic markers, 78.81% match to Nathan Carter. Confirmation, all 3 boys were biologically his. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping behind him. His pulse thudded in his ears. He wasn't sure how he made it to the hallway, or down to the garage, or even to the corner office building across the city. All he knew was that an hour later, he was pounding on the door of Veronica Hale's penthouse apartment. She answered in a silk robe, mascara faint beneath her eyes. She didn't look surprised to see him. I was wondering how long it would take, she said softly. He shoved the file into her hands. Did you know? Veronica didn't flinch. Yes, his hands balled into fists. You knew, all these years? I intercepted the letters, the emails. I made the decision. Why? His voice was hoarse, barely human. Because you weren't ready, she snapped. You were weeks from bankruptcy. A scandal like that, a personal distraction, could have ended everything. They were my children, he growled. They were a threat to your future. He stepped back as if struck. I built that future, he said through clenched teeth. No, she replied, voice razor sharp. We built it, and I protected it. He stared at her, eyes burning. You kept my children from me. I saved your life. You killed the part that mattered most, Veronica swallowed. For the first time in years, her poise faltered. Nathan took the folder, folded it slowly, and turned to leave. I won't forgive you, he said quietly. Ever. She didn't try to stop him. Back in his car, he didn't drive home. He parked near the river and sat in silence for over an hour, staring out at the gray water as if it might offer a different version of his life. One where he hadn't walked away. One where he had answered those letters. Eventually, he picked up his phone again. He scrolled to the name he had once deleted from every contact list, and with a shaking finger, he pressed call. It rang once, twice, and then hello? Her voice was clear, calm, steady. It's me, he said, a pause. I figured. I saw the article, he said. The boys. I know. I didn't know Emily, I swear to God. I believe you, she said quietly. But that doesn't change what was lost. I want to see them. She didn't speak for a long time. Then, we'll be at Central Park tomorrow morning, near the willow trees. Don't be late. He hung up, heart pounding. He had been running for 6 years. Now, finally, he was going to stop. The morning sun filtered through the curtains in soft, golden threads, catching on dust motes that drifted lazily through the air. Emily stood at the edge of her son's bedroom, watching them sleep, her arms crossed over her chest as if holding herself together. Eli's glasses were askew on the nightstand, one lens smudged with fingerprints. Max clutched a plastic raptor to his chest like a knight guarding a treasure, and Ben's little hands were curled around the edge of his pillow, his favorite harmonica resting just beneath it, as if he'd fallen asleep mid-note. In the quiet stillness of dawn, the reality of what was to come began pressing down on her shoulders. Today, the past and the present would finally collide. She had barely slept, the weight of her decision echoing with every tick of the kitchen clock. When the sun finally crept high enough to light the corner of the kitchen where she'd left Nathan's invitation, now torn, unfolded, reread, and folded again, she knew there was no turning back. She'd spent the night pacing the floor, hands trembling as she packed their small bag. Snacks, wipes, a backup juice box, 3 photo strips from the photo booth at the Science Museum. She added the harmonica, the raptor, and a pencil case filled with crayons. Because despite the gravity of the moment, they were still just kids. Her kids. She'd told them the night before in quiet whispers. Tomorrow, she said, you're going to meet someone important. Max had lit up, eyes wide with curiosity. A superhero? No, she had answered gently, brushing his curls from his forehead. Not quite, but someone who should have been here all along. Ben had said nothing, but he hadn't let go of her hand all night. Now, as the boys stirred, blinking sleep from their eyes and stretching under their cartoon blankets, Emily felt something rise in her chest. Fear? Not anymore. This was something different. Something quieter, heavier, resolve. She made breakfast like it was any other Saturday. Eggs, toast, apples cut into little smile shapes. Max talked about dinosaurs. Eli corrected him on the difference between a velociraptor and a T-Rex. Ben hummed to himself, staring at the sunlight on the wall. Halfway through, Ben looked up. Is today the day? Emily nodded slowly. Yes. Ben reached for his harmonica and slid it into his jacket pocket. Okay. They dressed in quiet coordination. Eli buttoned his collared shirt with the kind of precision that always made Emily smile. Max chose a bright orange hoodie with a cartoon planet on it and mismatched socks. Ben, as always, was a little slower, a little more thoughtful, his small brow furrowed as he double-checked his zipper twice. Before leaving, Emily grabbed the photo, the one of Nathan she had kept all these years. Not for longing, but for memory. She slid it into her purse beside her wallet and the boys' insurance cards, like it belonged among the essentials. They walked down the front steps into the kind of morning that felt like a held breath. The air was cool but not cold. The clouds were thin and fast-moving, slicing the sky into patches of pale blue. Central Park waited, just like she remembered it, green, sprawling, full of life. But today it felt more like a stage, a place where something unseen was about to unfold. They reached the willow trees near the lake. She had chosen that spot carefully, private enough to speak, open enough to run if the boys needed space. Nathan was already there. He stood with his hands in his coat pockets, shoulders slightly hunched, as if bracing himself against a wind that hadn't yet come. His eyes met hers across the grass. No one spoke. For a moment, everything stopped. Then Ben stepped forward, his little shoes crunching on gravel. He walked up to Nathan and tilted his head, studying him the way he did unfamiliar books in the library. "I'm Ben," he said quietly. Nathan knelt without hesitation, lowering himself until their eyes were level. "Hi, Ben?" "I like music," Ben said. Nathan's throat moved, a small tremor in his voice. "Me too. When I was your age, I played Twinkle Twinkle on a harmonica." Ben's eyes lit up. Slowly, he pulled the harmonica from his pocket and held it out like an offering. Nathan took it gently, his fingers trembling. "It looks just like mine." "It was Mom's first," Ben said. "But I play it now." Max ran up next, all energy and motion. "If you were a dinosaur, what kind would you be?" Nathan blinked, startled, then smiled for the first time. Maybe a stegosaurus?" "Good choice," Max nodded seriously. "They look slow, but they're tough." "Here." He reached into his hoodie and pulled out a tiny raptor figurine. "You can have this. His name is Kevin." Nathan accepted it like it was a priceless relic. "Mate, thank you." Eli came last, quiet and calculating. He didn't speak right away. He just stared. "You look taller in person," he said finally. Nathan laughed. "I get that a lot." Eli reached into his backpack and handed him a folded piece of paper. Crayon-written questions filled the page. "What's this?" Nathan asked. "Things we want to know," Eli said. "Like, do you eat cereal? Can you fix a bike? Have you ever cried at a movie?" Nathan unfolded the list slowly. At the bottom, in different handwriting, was one final question. "Are you going to leave again?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at all three boys, his sons, and then at Emily, who was still standing a few feet away, arms crossed protectively. He walked to her, stopping just short of touching distance. "I didn't know," he said, voice rough. "And I'm not going to pretend I deserve any of this. But I swear to you, I'm not leaving again." Emily studied his face, searching for the man she once knew, and perhaps now the man he could become. "You can sit with us," she said finally. That was all. They moved to the edge of the lake together, finding a bench beneath the willow trees. Nathan sat between Eli and Ben. Max plopped down at his feet, making Kevin the dinosaur fight a pebble. Ben leaned into his side, harmonica in hand. "I can show you how to play if you want." Nathan smiled, blinking hard. "I'd like that." As the wind rustled through the leaves above, Emily sat on the far end of the bench, watching them. Her chest ached, not with pain, but with something unspoken, something unfinished. But for the first time in 6 years, she didn't feel alone, and neither did they. Dinner that night felt like stepping into the eye of a storm, eerily calm, but thrumming with unspoken tension. Nathan stood in Emily's modest kitchen, the soft scent of roasted garlic and tomato floating in the air, mingling with the faint sound of laughter from the living room. The table had already been set, mismatched plates, cloth napkins worn soft by years of washing, and a centerpiece made entirely of Lego pieces shaped like a rocket. A raptor named Kevin stood guard at the edge of the placemats. Nathan hovered by the sink, unsure what to do with his hands. He hadn't been in a home like this in years, one that was lived in, cluttered not by wealth, but by memory. Crayon drawings were taped to the refrigerator. A soccer ball sat half deflated in the corner near a stack of overdue library books. The walls weren't adorned with abstract art or minimalist shelves, but with school photos, faded Polaroids, and sticky notes that said things like, "Don't forget Ben's show and tell," or "Wednesday, Library Day." He felt like a stranger in a world that should have been his. Emily moved easily around the kitchen, her sleeves rolled up, her hair in a messy twist, her bare feet silent against the tile. She glanced at him once, but didn't say much. She didn't have to. Her presence alone said enough. "You're here now. But we were here before you." In the living room, the boys were preparing for what Eli dramatically announced was the dinner table test. "We each ask you something," Eli explained, standing like a professor in front of an invisible chalkboard. "And if you answer wrong, we still eat, but you get fewer brownie points." Nathan gave a half laugh. "Is there a passing score?" Ben looked up from his harmonica. "Depends on how you answer mine." They all sat around the table, Emily at one end, Nathan across from her. The boys flanked him, their energy buzzing like static electricity. Max had already spilled a glass of water and blamed it on Kevin the dinosaur. Ben had brought the harmonica to the table, insisting it needed its own spot. Eli had a notepad, of course he did. Emily placed a steaming dish in the center, baked pasta bubbling with cheese and bits of sausage. "This is called Magnut Trom Doom," Max announced proudly. "We named it." "After 17 taste tests," Eli added, "it tastes okay." Ben mumbled. Nathan smiled. "Sounds like a serious operation." Emily arched a brow. "Serious enough to end a noodle fight. That's when I knew it passed." As they served themselves, the boys began their test. Eli went first. "Have you ever cried during a movie?" Nathan blinked. Once, during Field of Dreams." Eli squinted. "Acceptable." Max leaned forward. "Can you build a Lego dragon without the instructions?" Nathan tilted his head, considering. "I can try." Max nodded solemnly. "That's the right answer." Ben was last. He didn't ask a question right away. Instead, he turned his harmonica in his hands, eyes low. "What's your favorite sound?" he finally asked. Nathan paused, truly thinking. "My dad used to hum this tune when he worked on bikes in the garage. I don't even remember the name, but the sound of it felt like home." Ben smiled softly and passed his test by saying nothing at all. Emily watched all of it unfold, arms crossed, shoulders a little less rigid with each passing moment. It was strange, seeing Nathan like this, unguarded, visibly unsure, trying. He wasn't the young man who had walked away with fire in his veins and a business plan in his back pocket. He was older now, tired in a way money couldn't fix. After dinner, dishes clinked in the sink while Nathan dried each one with quiet care. Emily washed. They didn't speak much, but the silence between them was not the same as before. It wasn't sharp, it wasn't loaded, it was suspended, like a note hanging in the air, waiting to resolve. In the living room, Max was building a new Lego monstrosity. "Time for the dragon test," he declared. "Can you build this without instructions?" Nathan crouched beside him, sleeves rolled up. Challenge accepted. Ben perched on the piano bench nearby, slowly plunking out Twinkle Twinkle with tender concentration. Eli read from a well-worn fantasy novel, occasionally glancing up to observe the chaos. At one point, Emily appeared in the doorway and simply stood there, arms folded, watching the three boys orbit around Nathan as if he'd always been part of the system. Later, after toothbrushes were wielded like swords and pajamas declared too itchy or not dinosaur enough, the boys finally tumbled into bed. Emily kissed each one goodnight. Ben asked for his harmonica to sleep with. Eli asked if Nathan could come for breakfast. Max just grinned and whispered, "Stegosaurus." Back in the kitchen, Nathan was drying the last glass. "I think I passed the dragon test," he said lightly. Emily leaned against the doorway, arms crossed again. "Luca's tough, he makes people earn it." A brief silence settled again, this time heavier. Nathan set the glass down carefully. "Can I ask you something?" She nodded once. "Have you forgiven me?" The question hung there like a fragile thread. She didn't answer right away. Her gaze drifted past him, toward the hallway, where echoes of laughter still lingered. "I tried to hate you," she said finally, voice soft. "It was easier than missing you. Or hoping." He nodded, eyes lowered. "I deserve that." "But I don't think I hate you anymore," she added, meeting his eyes. "I haven't forgotten, but maybe I don't need to hate you to move forward." He stepped closer, stopping a few feet from her. "You don't owe me anything," he said, "but I'll show up, every time. For them, and for you if you let me." Emily exhaled slowly. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The flicker in her eyes said maybe. Not yes. Not yet. But maybe. From the hallway, a single soft note floated out. A harmonica, played by tiny fingers in the dark. It wavered, uncertain, but lingered like a promise. Nathan turned toward the sound, his eyes glistening just enough to betray what he didn't say. And for the first time in years, Emily let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, some broken things weren't meant to be erased. Some were meant to be rebuilt. Brick by mismatched brick. Note by trembling note. Veronica Hale sat alone in her glass-walled corner office as twilight draped the city in a haze of violet and gold. Below, the streets shimmered with the glow of headlights, but up here, high above it all, the silence was a suffocating thing. Her desk was immaculate, just the way she liked it, but tonight everything felt too sharp, too loud, too fragile. She had just finished rereading the digital folder. Dozens of emails, unsent drafts, intercepted letters, all addressed to Nathan, all from Emily. She should have deleted them years ago. She almost had. Instead, she had archived them under a name no one would ever guess: Patient History, Cardio. But now that Emily was back in Nathan's life, and worse, now that the children existed not in theory but in bright, breathing reality, Veronica's control was unraveling. A knock on her office door startled her. Marcus stepped in, a man once loyal to her, once part of the same mission, now visibly eroded by disillusionment. His beard had grayed, his coat hung looser than it used to, and his eyes held the weight of a man who had kept too many secrets for too long. "You kept them," he said flatly, his eyes flicking to the open file on her screen. Veronica didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Of course I did." Marcus stepped closer. "Why now?" Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. "Because she's attending the wedding," she said, her voice clipped, mechanical. "It changes everything." "It shouldn't," Marcus said softly. "Not unless it already meant something." Veronica didn't respond. Instead, she reached for a letter, one of the first Emily ever sent. She read it aloud, her voice brittle. "Dear Nathan, I heard 3 heartbeats today. Not mine, not yours. 3. She stopped, the paper trembling in her hands. Marcus lowered his voice. "You could have told him. He wasn't ready. He wasn't yours to control. He wasn't just Nathan Carter, Tear," she snapped, turning to face him. "He was Ellis. He was the product, the brand, the vision. One misstep, one scandal, and we would have lost the Series C funding, the acquisition deals, the board. Maybe that was the price." Veronica's jaw tightened. "You don't understand." "No," Marcus said. "I do. I helped you bury it." Silence fell like a curtain between them. "What are you going to do now?" he asked. Veronica exhaled shakily. "I don't know, but whatever it is, it starts here." She selected all the messages in the folder. Her cursor hovered over the delete button. Marcus watched her. "I always wondered why you didn't destroy them," he said, voice low. "You had the access, the time. Why keep them?" Veronica hesitated. Then, so softly it was nearly a whisper, "Because I thought maybe, one day he'd need to know." Marcus nodded. "And now?" She said nothing. He stepped toward the door, then paused. "I'm leaving the company," he said. Veronica's eyes widened slightly. "For good." She nodded slowly. "I figured." He lingered in the doorway. "You were brilliant, Veronica. You still are, but brilliance doesn't mean you were right." And then he was gone. The office felt cavernous without him. Veronica turned back to the screen. The cursor still blinked, waiting. Her finger trembled over the key. Then, in a moment of mechanical resolve, she pressed delete. The folder vanished. No backups, no fail-safes, no proof, just silence. Back at the apartment, pale, Nathan sat in the dark. He hadn't turned the lights on since coming home. The city blinked outside the windows like a galaxy too far to touch. He cradled a photo in his hands, one that Emily had tucked into Ben's jacket pocket, probably without realizing it. The 3 boys sat side by side on a swing set, grinning, their hair windblown, their knees muddy. His sons. He didn't know how to be a father. He didn't know how to undo 6 years of nothing. But for the first time in his life, he wanted to learn. His phone buzzed. It was Julia. She was calling from the wedding venue. He let it ring. Then it buzzed again. This time, a message from Veronica. Only 2 words. "We need to talk." He ignored that too. Instead, he scrolled to the contact labeled Emily. His thumb hovered over the call button. He didn't press it. Instead, he typed a message. Thank you. For dinner. For today. I meant what I said. No response came. He didn't expect one. Across the city, Emily stood on her balcony, arms folded tightly around her as the wind tugged at her sleeves. Below, her sons slept. Ben with his harmonica, Max with Kevin the raptor still clutched in one hand, and Eli with a flashlight and a notepad under the covers. She'd watched Nathan that evening. Every word, every movement. There was something different in him now. Not perfect, not polished, but real. And it terrified her. She wasn't sure what scared her more, that he might walk away again, or that this time he might stay. Inside, she pulled open a drawer and took out the envelope she'd never sent. The original letter, the one with the ultrasound pictures still tucked inside. Faded. Fragile. She unfolded it slowly. Dear Nathan, it began. I heard 3 heartbeats today. She didn't finish reading. Instead, she grabbed a pen, found a blank sheet of paper, and wrote a single sentence. You'll meet them again tomorrow. Bring your questions. They have plenty too. She folded it, slid it into a fresh envelope, and placed it by the door. Ben would ask if the harmonica should come. Max would want to pack snacks and make sure Kevin had his own seat. Eli would demand a new list of questions and a pencil sharpener. And she? She would carry the truth. And this time, she wouldn't carry it alone. The ballroom at the St. Regis was meant to shine like a crown jewel on the night of Nathan Carter's wedding. Gold-trimmed columns framed arched ceilings, velvet curtains pooled gracefully across marble floors. Crystal chandeliers twinkled with forced elegance, and the scent of roses, imported from Ecuador, drifted through the air like expectation. Every detail had been crafted to perfection, except the one that mattered most. The groom was missing. Inside the bridal suite, Julia Blackwell stood still in her half-zipped gown, surrounded by a flurry of stylists and assistants who spoke in hushed, hurried tones. Her lips had just been painted the exact shade of rosewater pink her stylist insisted matched the linens. Her bouquet lay untouched on the vanity, and though the soft violin music wafting in from the ballroom was meant to soothe, all it did was amplify the silence of a man who should have already been there. When Nathan finally walked in, his coat damp from the rain, his collar slightly unbuttoned, everyone stopped. Stylists froze mid-gesture. The hairstylist, holding a can of hairspray like a weapon, slowly stepped back. Julia met his gaze in the mirror and sighed, not from shock, but from recognition. Let me guess, she said dryly, turning to face him, arms folding over her bodice. You're not here to confirm the seating chart. Nathan didn't try to smile. He simply stood there, jaw tight, fists clenched at his sides. No. Of course not, she murmured. Say it, Nathan. Say the thing we both already know. I can't marry you. A long pause followed, filled only by the sound of the rain beginning to fall harder against the windows. One of the assistants coughed awkwardly. Julia didn't flinch. She turned slowly back toward the mirror, reached for a makeup wipe, and gently erased the lipstick. Funny, she said. I guessed it the moment I saw you walk in. You have that look, like someone just canceled Christmas. Nathan remained silent, his shoulders heavy. She's here, isn't she? Julia asked. He nodded once. She has kids? 3 boys. Julia blinked. Triplets? He said nothing. He didn't need to. Julia chuckled softly, the sound more tired than amused. I always knew there was someone else. Nathan frowned. There wasn't. Not while we were. I don't mean someone you were sleeping with, Nathan, she cut in. I mean someone who lived in the corners of your mind, the kind of someone you build empires to forget. Silence. I'm sorry, he said finally, voice raw. Julia nodded. I believe you. She turned and began removing the earrings her mother had insisted on. I'm not mad, she added. Well, okay, maybe I'm a little mad, but I don't hate you. She paused, staring at her reflection. I hate that I was a placeholder in a life you never intended to finish with me. Nathan swallowed hard. I didn't know about them, he said. She looked over at him again, really looked. But you know now. He nodded. Then go, she said softly. And for God's sake, don't waste time pretending this is just about the kids. Outside, Nathan's driver was already waiting. But Nathan didn't get in right away. Instead, he stood at the curb staring at the downpour, rain soaking through his clothes like pennants. The image of the 3 boys, Ben with his harmonica, Max with that ridiculous plastic raptor, and Eli with the crayon list of questions, played on repeat in his mind. He finally got in and shut the door. Where to, sir? The driver asked, home. But before the car reached the first stoplight, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Emily. "We'll be home after 9. If you're serious, come by. No punctuation, no warmth, just fact." He stared at it for a long moment, then changed course. Emily's house was quiet when he arrived. No TV blaring. No video games screaming from the hallway. Just the faint clink of dishes in the kitchen and the low murmur of jazz spilling from a Bluetooth speaker. He stood outside the door, unsure if he should knock. But before he could decide, the door opened. Ben stood there, barefoot, pajamas wrinkled, harmonica in hand. "Hi," Ben said simply. "Hi," Nathan replied, his throat thick. "You're late," Ben observed. Nathan knelt down, leveling with him. "You're right, I'm sorry." Ben stepped back and opened the door wider. Emily stood in the kitchen, towel over her shoulder, drying a dish. Max was building a new fort out of couch cushions, narrating a story about Kevin the dinosaur in a rocket ship. Eli sat at the table, working through a puzzle with all the concentration of a small professor. Nathan stepped inside. "You're wet," Emily said, her voice even. "I canceled the wedding." She didn't react right away, just set the dish down gently and looked at him. "You didn't have to do that for me." "I didn't," he said. "I did it because I couldn't pretend anymore." A long pause. "Did she understand?" Emily asked. "She did," he said. "She knew. She always knew." Emily nodded. Ben tugged on Nathan's sleeve. "Want to hear a song?" Nathan smiled. "Absolutely." Ben sat down at the piano. The first few notes were uneven, but gradually Twinkle Twinkle Little Star emerged, full of softness and intention. The whole room stilled as he played. When it ended, Nathan clapped. "That was beautiful." Then shrugged shyly and went back to his harmonica. Nathan sat at the table beside Eli, who looked up. "We added a few more questions," Eli said, sliding over a new piece of paper. "You'll need to answer them before bedtime." Nathan scanned the list. "Do you like dogs? Have you ever climbed a tree? Can you ride a bike with no hands? Are you going to leave again?" His eyes lingered on that last one. "No," he said, "I won't." Eli studied him for a moment, then nodded. Max popped out from the fort, brandishing a toy sword. "Time for the next test. You have to survive a noodle fight and build a dragon ship." Nathan laughed. "Do I get instructions this time?" Max grinned. "Nope." Emily stood in the doorway, watching them all. There was a lightness in her chest she hadn't felt in years. Not certainty, not safety, but possibility. When bedtime finally rolled around, and the boys had brushed their teeth and clambered into bed with far too many stuffed animals, Emily returned to the kitchen. Nathan was drying another glass. "I think I passed a few tests tonight," he said. "Maybe," she said with a soft smile. He looked at her. "May I come again tomorrow?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Breakfast is at 8. Max likes pancakes shaped like planets." He chuckled. "I'll bring syrup." Emily turned away, but not before he saw it, the flicker of warmth, of trust not yet earned, but maybe on the horizon. As he left, Ben's harmonica played a single uncertain note in the dark. And in that brief, imperfect sound, Nathan heard everything he needed to stay. The next morning, the halls of Ellis Global hummed with energy. The executive floor, with its panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline, gleamed under a cloudless sky, reflecting the city's light like a mirror of ambition. Polished oak stretched down the length of the boardroom, and every chair had been straightened to an exact angle, Veronica's signature touch. But this morning, something was different. Nathan Carter stepped off the elevator, not in a tailored suit, but in a soft navy sweater and jeans. His hair was slightly tousled, his expression calm but focused. Behind him, 3 small shadows followed: Eli, Max, and Ben. Each of the boys had dressed with their own flair, Eli in a button-up shirt and cardigan, already flipping through a tablet app for design prototypes. Max wore a shirt covered in glow-in-the-dark dinosaurs and carried Kevin the Raptor under one arm like a CEO in training. Ben clutched his harmonica and peered cautiously around, wide-eyed and quiet. Emily appeared a step behind them, her eyes scanning the hallway, unsure of the attention they might draw. Her olive-green coat swept around her calves, and the lanyard badge on her chest, temporary visitor, felt both appropriate and laughable. She wasn't here to visit. She was here to be seen. "This place smells like robot farts," Max declared as they walked past the glass-walled research lab. Nathan laughed. "That's just the 3D printer." "I still think it's robot farts," Max insisted. They entered the R&D floor, where engineers and developers froze mid-keystroke. Conversations halted. Everyone turned to look. Most of them had only ever seen Nathan Carter through board meetings and Forbes articles. Now he stood here barefoot adjacent, with 3 children orbiting around him like little moons, and a woman at his side who did not belong to the narrative they'd been fed. James, the head of R&D, stepped out of his office, his brow furrowing as he took in the scene. "Well, hell," he said. "You used to joke about cloning yourself. Guess you figured out a better way." Nathan grinned. "James, meet Eli, Max, and Ben." James extended a hand to each boy. "Welcome to the lab. Do you like robots?" Max's eyes lit up. "Do they know kung fu?" James blinked. No. They will," Max said confidently. "Kevin's gonna teach them." Ben tugged Nathan's sleeve. "Is there a quiet room?" Nathan nodded, remembering. "Yeah, there's a sound-isolated booth in the back. Want to try it?" Ben nodded. Nathan led him there, opened the door, and watched as the little boy stepped inside. It was a chamber built for testing sound design, dead quiet. Ben stood still for a moment, then sat cross-legged and pulled out his harmonica. The first note was soft, curious, but it lingered. It filled the space like sunlight warming a cold room. Nathan stood outside the glass, watching, not realizing his hand was pressed lightly to his chest. Behind him, Emily approached, her gaze locked on their son. "He does that when he's overwhelmed," she said softly. "The sound settles him." Nathan nodded, not speaking. "You didn't know," she continued, "but they're pieces of you, in the things they do, in how they see the world." "I'm still learning how to see them," he whispered. Emily glanced at him. "Then don't stop." Later, on a tour through the robotics wing, Eli paused in front of a wall of screens showing live AI testing data. His eyes scanned the inputs like he was reading another language. "What model architecture is this?" he asked, not looking away. James blinked, amused. "How old are you?" 8.5. Almost 9, Eli said without missing a beat. James crouched beside him. "It's a custom hybrid, LSTM layered with a transformer backbone." Eli tilted his head. "You'll get cleaner prediction curves if you isolate the training sets based on temporal clustering." James looked up at Nathan. "He just diagnosed our lag problem." "I know," Nathan said, pride blooming in his voice. At the far end of the floor, a quiet room stood framed by floor-to-ceiling windows. The executive boardroom. The place where Nathan Carter had made billion-dollar decisions. Where he had built an empire with his name on the wall and no space for legacy beyond contracts and shares. He opened the door, letting them step inside. "This is where the big calls happen," Nathan said. Max sprinted to the biggest chair and spun in it, legs swinging wildly. "This is my captain's seat now." Eli examined the projection screen controls. "What's the code to override these?" Ben walked to the edge of the window and looked out, harmonica tucked beneath his chin. Nathan watched them explore the space that had once defined him. Then he walked over to the head of the table, knelt down beside Ben, and said softly, "One day, maybe this will be yours." Ben looked up. "Can I build music robots?" Nathan smiled. "Only if they play Otis originals." Emily entered quietly, hands in her coat pockets. She said nothing at first, just took in the sight, her sons running through glass-walled power like they were playing tag in a park. "They belong in rooms like this," Nathan said. "So do you," she replied. Nathan turned to her. "I've spent years making things look impressive. But this is what real looks like." Emily's gaze softened, but her voice was steady. "Then make it last." Before they left, they stopped in front of the large chrome sign bearing the company name, Ellis Global. "Photo time," Emily said, holding up her phone. The boys lined up in front of the sign. Nathan stood behind them, hands resting lightly on their shoulders. "Should we look serious?" Eli asked. "No," Emily said, "just be yourselves." Nathan leaned in slightly. "That's the best kind of picture." The shutter clicked. And in that single moment, surrounded by glass and steel with laughter echoing off cold walls, something unspoken shifted. This wasn't a reunion. It was the beginning of something new. A family. Imperfect, real, unfinished, but finally whole. Thank you so much for staying with us through the end of this heartfelt journey. If you're still here, it means you felt something, just like we did. This story reminds us that it's never too late to face the truth, to reconnect, or to rebuild what was once lost. Sometimes life gives us second chances, but it's up to us to recognize them, Fight for them and cherish them. No matter how far we drift, love, real love, has a way of finding its way back. Where are you watching from? We'd love to hear your story, your thoughts, or even your favorite moment from today's video. Drop a comment below and let us know. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing. Every week, we bring you powerful stories like this one. Stories that inspire, heal, and remind us that behind every door, every silence, there's a story waiting to be told. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment. Thank you for being part of this growing family. See you in the next story.